The Matildas' semi-final opponent locked in, preparing to face England on Wednesday night after last night's heart-stopping penalty shootout. Labour looking to avoid politicisation of the voice to Parliament as one Liberal leader changes her stance, now revealing she'll vote no. The death toll in Hawaii rises to 89, with officials saying rebuild efforts from the fires could cost more than $8 billion. And in sport, Carlton set for their first final series in 10 years after defeating the D's in a controversial finish at the MCG. Good evening. We begin with the latest on the Women's World Cup, with the Matildas' semi-final opponents now locked in, now preparing to face England after last night's heart-stopping penalty shootout. As Darby Travers reports, the Lionesses defeated Colombia 2-1, meaning they'll take on the Aussie co-hosts on Wednesday night in front of a packed stadium and millions more tuning in at home.
Well, it was a nail-biting finish last night, but in the end Australia were able to get it done. The Matildas were tied with France at 0-0 at the end of the regulation time, despite some close calls, and extra time didn't help either side, leaving it down to a penalty shootout. Australia coming out on top at 7-6 after 20 penalties, sending the side straight through into the semi-finals. The game was watched on in front of almost 50,000 fans in Brisbane and millions at home, as well as plenty at the AFL games that were getting underway, with stadiums showing the game while clubs also posted their reactions to social media. We know now who the Aussies will be facing, with England defeating Colombia 2-1 last night. That game will be on Wednesday night, and before that Sweden will take on Spain on Tuesday.
Two other news tonight. Nationals leader David Littleproud has openly expressed his opposition to the legislation of an Indigenous voice to Parliament, setting him on a collision course with fellow members of the coalition. While the Liberals have also taken a stance against the Indigenous voice referendum, the opposition has advocated for an alternative approach. They propose the establishment of local and regional Indigenous voices. Littleproud has cast doubt on the feasibility of a regional and local voice model, suggesting that such a model may not effectively address the concerns at hand. Despite concerns raised, the Nationals leader has downplayed the notion that a legislative voice model might be implemented should the coalition emerge victorious in the upcoming election. The emerging differences of opinion within the coalition on a matter of the Indigenous voice highlight a larger disagreement. This comes at a time where federal Liberals are publicly criticising the decision of Mark Speakman, leader of the New South Wales Liberal Party, to endorse the Indigenous voice concept. WA Liberal leader Libby Matten has announced she's changed her stance on the Indigenous voice to Parliament and will now vote no. Ms Matten said her mind has been changed as a result of WA's controversial Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Act, which the state Labor government is now set to repeal. She has claimed the approach to how both the voice and the act were both implemented was the same. Despite voting no to the voice, Ms Matten says she still supports recognising Indigenous Australians in the Constitution. It comes as a senior Labor source tells 6 News the party is looking to avoid politicisation and does not want to make the Indigenous voice to Parliament about themselves. Chief anchor Leo Puglisi has more.
This senior Labor source has told 6 News the party does not want to make the Indigenous voice to Parliament about them or politicise it. We know there's been critics of the voice who have been calling it quote-unquote Labor's voice. What Labor is also now looking to do is really have First Nations voices, pardon the pun, at the forefront of the campaign. They've said the campaign efforts to support the voice are continuing on the ground with door-knocking, community forums, although we are expecting efforts from both sides to really ramp up once we know a date. Now, the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has already ruled out September and December, leaving only a handful of options. Labor is, of course, the biggest party supporting the voice. The federal Libs and Nats are opposed. We have only just heard this weekend from the New South Wales Liberal leader, Mark Speakman, who has thrown his personal support behind it. He has clarified, though, that isn't necessarily reflective of the full New South Wales Liberal Party. Another senior New South Wales Liberal MP, Matt Keane, has also been advocating for the voice. But Mark Speakman, like Dominic Perrottet before him, coming out and giving his support to the Yes campaign.
This will give respect to Indigenous Australians. It will lift up all Australians, make us feel better about ourselves when you acknowledge the fullness and richness of your history. And it will also be recognised by the world. Will be watching what happens as well. It will be a sign that we're a confident, mature nation going forward. And I note as well, and I congratulate Mark Speakman, the leader of the coalition in New South Wales, the opposition leader, for his very clear statements that he will be voting yes and supporting yes in the referendum campaign, following on from Dominic Perrottet's support for a yes vote in this referendum campaign as well. I say to Australians, this is an opportunity. Don't miss it.
Now, we know polling continues to be a big concern for the Yes campaign. To give an idea, in the March 29 to April 1 News poll, Yes was at a 58-42 lead. Their most recent from News poll, 56-54 to no. That is when voters don't have an undecided option. 10 to 13 May this year, Resolve Strategic, 53-47 yes. Their most recent, 48-52 no. And that has been a pretty consistent trend over the past few months. It wasn't until early June when we had a major poll, it was Resolve, that showed a lead for no nationwide. On social media now, we have seen false claims emerging about the accuracy of pollings when it comes to previous elections, claims of bias also being levelled. To go on to some of those, in 2019 polling for the federal election, I mean, that was infamously wrong, wasn't it? News poll conducted shortly before Election Day gave Labor a 51.5 to 48.5 lead over the coalition. The actual two-party preferred was essentially flipped version of that result when it came to those two. A lot has changed though since then. News poll is now entirely online. That is compared to, the old telephone landline polling, and polls do appear to be a lot closer to the actual result. News poll conducted just before the 2022 federal election had Labor 53 on two-party preferred. It ended up being 52.1. Every single poll conducted that year had given Labor a two-party preferred lead of some kind. At the Victorian state election also last year, the last news poll before Election Day gave Labor 54.5 on two-party preferred. It ended up being 55. Every single poll also conducted that year giving Labor a lead of some kind. Some have also pointed towards the polling Dan Andrews said of Mulgrave at that election as, I guess, proof of incorrect polling. It should be noted, though, at the time, the Herald Sun, this is what they reported, quote, independent candidate Ian Cook's campaign manager, Emily Coltrane, said that a survey done at Mulgrave's only early voting station showed Mr Andrews was at risk of losing his seat, with preferences factored in. A sample of 159 voters had Mr Cook on a 57.2 lead and the Premier on 42.8, she said. So that was coming from Cook's campaign manager. It was not a poll conducted by any news outlet. The Australian Marriage Law Postal Survey in 2019, every single major poll gave yes the lead. The last news poll, yes at 63, and the number being 61.6. Similar story with New South Wales, we should also say. That was back in March. All polls gave Labor a two-party preferred lead of some kind in 2023. The last news poll before the election, ALP at 54.5. They ended up being 54.26. On those allegations of bias, of course, it is worth noting News Corp doesn't conduct news poll. It is administered by international market research group YouGov. Then, of course, it's published in The Australian, as we know. And for the record, by the way, Redbridge, which did some of that polling last week, their director, Cos Samaras, he's a former Labor strategist and has confirmed publicly he does support the voice to Parliament.
Russian officials claim they've stopped a Ukrainian rocket attack on the Crimean bridge. Russia's defense ministry says there was no damage and no casualties, claiming they downed 20 Ukrainian drones. The bridge has been the target since the invasion of Ukraine began in February last year. Back in October, Russian authorities said a truck bomb caused a section of the bridge to collapse. At the time, a Ukrainian called the explosion the beginning. The death toll in Hawaii has risen to 89 and may rise further following horrific fires on the island of Maui. Officials say rebuild efforts could cost more than $5.5 billion US, which is more than 8 billion Australian dollars. At least 2,200 buildings and other structures have been damaged or destroyed, with many historical landmarks lost. More than 2,170 acres have been burned in total. Residents are slowly being allowed to return to survey the devastation, many being left with nothing. Reaction is continuing after it was announced US President Joe Biden's son, Hunter, will be investigated by a special counsel with additional powers. As North American correspondent Wyatt Sharp reports, Republicans have been pushing for an inquiry into Hunter Biden's business dealings.
The Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, who happens to be appointed by President Joe Biden, like all of the other cabinet nominees in the president's cabinet, he actually appointed David Weiss, who is a U.S. attorney in Delaware, who, as of right now, has been investigating some of Hunter Biden's business dealings. And he asked to be appointed as special counsel in order to move this investigation forward from here. In Washington, Attorney General Merrick Garland, he told reporters that Weiss asked him on Tuesday that in his judgment, the investigation has reached a point where he believes a special counsel is necessary. A special counsel needs to be appointed. Here's a quote I can read you. Upon considering his request, as well as the extraordinary circumstances relating to this matter, I have concluded it is in the public interest to appoint him as special counsel. That, of course, coming from the Attorney General Merrick Garland. But you do have a lot of people, as any situation like this, who are reacting to the situation. Of course, I'm sure we will get into that here in a moment. But I mean, you have the president and the White House, who, as predicted, really isn't saying a lot. Perhaps respectably not saying a lot, given that they don't want to concern themselves in legal matters, similar to how they don't want to concern themselves, if, say, Donald Trump gets indicted, the White House really doesn't want to make a lot of comments on some of these legal issues through the Department of Justice. And that really is the point of a special counsel, is instead of the process going through the Department of Justice, Merrick Garland, the Department of Justice, they appoint a special counsel like they've done here, when they foresee potentially some sort of conflict of interest. And of course, that is possible here, given that, again, Merrick Garland is the Attorney General. He's appointed by President Biden, and the main subject of this investigation is Hunter Biden, who is, of course, the president's son. I'll read you a tweet here from Nikki Haley, who is one of the Republican presidential hopefuls. This was after the news broke that there would be a special counsel appointed. And for me personally, I get the memo that she thinks this doesn't necessarily go far enough. Her tweet says, quote, "Americans don't trust Joe Biden's Department of Justice. The House should keep its foot on the gas and continue its investigations on Hunter Biden. Don't let up." That was from Nikki Haley, who is, of course, one of many of the candidates in the GOP presidential field as of right now. And of course, a common theme that we are seeing, not just from Nikki Haley, but some of the Republicans on Capitol Hill who are leading in these sort of investigations, including from James Comer, who's the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, they really are trying their best to brand this as Joe Biden's Department of Justice, when in reality, that really is not the case with this specific investigation. It's not really leading with facts per se to claim that, because again, they have appointed a special counsel, in this case, David Weiss, an attorney out of Delaware, but largely the same reaction from Republicans on Capitol Hill as well, again, who are claiming that it doesn't go far enough. They are all saying that they will continue its investigation regardless, perhaps, of what this special counsel is saying. So certainly we will continue to follow it and see kind of what the reaction from Republicans is as perhaps the special counsel uncovers new details. You hear a lot, going back to the Republican aspect of things for a moment here, Donald Trump has had a lot of legal troubles, and anytime Donald Trump gets indicted, it's kind of a race amongst the Republican presidential candidates as to who can jump the fastest to the conclusion that this is weaponization. And that's kind of the theory here is which one of them can back Donald Trump up the quickest. But then, of course, Republicans were front and center the minute that this news was broken. They were the ones that immediately were criticizing President Joe Biden. So it depends. Will Democrats stick with Joe Biden the way Republicans have stuck with Donald Trump on his indictments? The difference here is that Donald Trump is the one who's being indicted. He is a candidate for the presidency, whereas in this case, yes, Hunter Biden is the president's son, but he is still a private citizen. He is not the one running for office, running for the presidency of the United States. He's not the one that is currently in the White House in Washington. So, I'm sure that Republicans will try and use this point as a political point to try and implicate some sort of connection here with President Biden. But again, the large consensus that a lot of people are drawing today is that Hunter Biden is a private citizen, so they can make the attacks, they can say what they want in terms of Republicans, but at the end of the day, it really is yet to be seen, given that this news is so fresh, you could say, whether or not it will have an impact on the Biden presidential campaign. But over the course of the coming weeks, as more polls come out, and as we can see perhaps what the benefits, some of the negatives perhaps to appointing a special counsel really are, that should be uncovered over the course of the next little while.
Alright, to sport now, and apart from the Matildas, we've also seen a thriller in the AFL. Carlton set for their first final series in 10 years after defeating the D's in a controversial finish at the G. Melbourne's Christian Petrarca kicked what looked to many like a goal with less than a minute to go, but the goal umpire called it as touched. Then a score review then showing there is insufficient evidence, meaning that the umpire's call stood and it was not called a goal. The Blues last played in the AFL's final series in 2013, where they defeated Richmond, but then lost to Sydney in a semi. Sticking with the AFL, and West Coast have been demolished by Fremantle, going down by 101 points. The Eagles failed to score a single goal in the second and third quarters, with the Dockers 95 points in front at three-quarter time. Coach Adam Simpson said his side couldn't handle Freo's pressures, telling reporters they've had 51,000s turn up today and let them down.
Yeah, we couldn't handle their pressure. The contest, the danger signs after the 15-minute mark was probably the ease of which they scored. So the ball hit the deck in our back half, and we've been holding up all right recently, but it was too easy. And then floodgates opened really for the next 2.5 quarters, and get what you deserve. So we weren't strong enough around the ball. We coughed it up. And we didn't manage it at all.
Alright, here is Ivan Amelli with a look at what's making news in Perth on WAMN News.
Thank you, Austin. Tonight on WAMN News, the Yes campaign fights back as Warren Mundine prepares to come to Perth. An exclusive interview coming up.
A week of major political backflips as WA scraps its new land heritage laws.
Nurses to run for politics as the ANF seeks public support for a parliamentary bid.
And ending homelessness. Lord Mayor candidate Sandy Angie's push for the disadvantaged ones in our city. And later, Dr. Andrew Miller's comment. Join us tonight on the WAMN News Facebook page and YouTube channel.
To weather forecast now, starting with Monday, Brisbane partly cloudy, top of 28, Sydney showers about 16, Canberra 10, rain about, Melbourne mostly cloudy 13, Hobart 11 and cloudy, Adelaide mostly sunny 15, Perth 19, sunny, and in Darwin as usual sunny and 33. And looking ahead to Tuesday, Brisbane it will be partly cloudy and 26, Sydney it will be rain about 16, Canberra 13 and partly cloudy, Melbourne partly cloudy 13, Hobart 13 also partly cloudy, Adelaide sunny and 17, Perth showers at times 18, and in Darwin 32 and clouds about. A reminder of the top stories we're following on 6 News for this hour, and the Matildas semi-final opponent has been locked in, now preparing to face England after last night's heart-stopping penalty shootout. The Lionesses defeated Colombia 2-1, meaning they'll take on Aussie co-host on Wednesday night in front of packed stadium and millions tuning in at home. And a senior Labor source has told 6 News that the party is looking to avoid politicisation does not want the Indigenous voice to Parliament to be about themselves. It comes as WA Liberal leader Libby Matton has announced she will change her stance and will now vote no. And that is 6 News for this hour. There's more news 24/7 on our website, 6newsau.com, and on social media, just search 6newsau to find us. More news coverage continues right after this. For now though, I'm Austin Pollock. Thanks very much for your company. We'll see you again soon. Good night.